Welcome back to AI Ramblings. It's slightly delayed this week because a little bit of overseas travel. I just came back from India, a quick 1 week trip. And so we've had a slight adjustment in our broadcast schedule, as it were. Luckily, it brings AI Ramblings episode 31, the day, Neil McQuana, on the day of OpenAI ChatGPT's third birthday. Today is the third birthday, the day that kind of ChatGPT was launched. And, anyone who's excited about AI, it's all greatness and wonderful things that we to get to talk about every week. But on the other hand, there are ups and downs to this thing as well. So we'll talk about some of that. So AI is now a toddler with ChatGPT and pretty momentous in many ways, particularly because you've seen in 3 years more changes with this technology wave to our times and society, and especially the economy and companies, than we've seen in the first 3 years of other tech waves, where I had the benefit of being at the front table in the PC era, in the internet era, in the mobile era, etc. And we've seen more change in a more compressed time than any of those waves, and there's a lot more to go in the earliest of days. And so it's important to kind of mark that. So that is our news item number one in terms of ChatGPT turning 3 years old. Ironically, it's funny when you see, a 3-year-old when goes to kindergarten, all of a sudden he or she recognizes that he's not the only toddler in the world, center of the world's attention. And OpenAI, that's our second news item of the week, that OpenAI is seeing a little bit more competition from Gemini, from Google last week that we talked about. And Google continued that sprint with a double-pronged attack, not just one punch to ChatGPT and GPT last week, but this week, a right hook to Nvidia with their Google TPUs that became more broadly potentially supported by companies like Meta. OpenAI is using them, etc. So now all of a sudden on the Nvidia side, where they control 90% or more of the GPU market, they're going to have to share a little bit of that market, maybe 5, maybe 10% with Google, with their TPUs, which is the only other semiconductor multi-processing architecture that Google has the ability to get made at scale through a TSMC. And so it's a viable alternative, not a replacement. Nvidia stock had a little bit of jostling up and down, etc. This is not a binary game. I had a detailed post up today actually, Sunday, where it talks about how both of these things expand the market. It's not in these early days, it's not a one versus the other. It's one changing the other in a good way and making the market better. So that is our second news item that I wanted to touch on. The third one is, we've had all these bottlenecks over the last 3 years. We've had continuing supply issues with GPUs, enough GPUs to do compute for training, inference, for all the agentic reasoning stuff that we want to do. And that continues. It's alleviated somewhat, where NVIDIA is now in the process of ramping millions of Blackwell GPUs in the next couple of years, cost of hundreds of billions to the people who have to buy the pickaxe and shovels for this AI gold rush. But there is another component which we have talked about, but it's came to the fore this week with Dell and SK Hynix and other chip companies on the memory side, highlighting that there are increasing shortages of scale for memory chips, because as we deploy AI at scale for consumers and business, we want them to remember things about us a lot more, which means we need more memory both on the servers and the data centers, and we need more memory on our smartphones, etc. And there is increasing amount of supply chain constraints around that. Prices are going up a little bit, not helped, of course, by the ongoing tariff situation around the world with supply chain. So memory is a next bottleneck kind of a thing that we wanted to touch on. So those are the three main news items that I wanted to highlight in a very, very busy week before we go on to our main topic, which is about AI applications. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a funny coincidence that, we're doing this on the third anniversary as it is of ChatGPT. I feel like I was just thinking before we started the show, it's flown by. I think I was in college, I was still doing my undergrad, and I remember a friend came up to me and showed me ChatGPT. I had, it just like where were you when it happened kind of thing. Someone showed it to me and they were using it obviously for school to simplify assignments and stuff. And obviously it was in such infancy compared to where it's at now, but It's crazy, and as you said, the competition's worked itself up fast. I still think we are in kind of a band aid state where people refer to all AI as ChatGPT now, similar to like how people call bandages, Band Aid and tissues Kleenex. And will that go away? We probably won't know for a while, but it's yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's been 3 years, and doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. So
No, and it's exciting. Again, as I said, the 3 year moniker is good because again, a toddler going to kindergarten recognizes not the center of the universe. There are other kids, and you got to
right.
play nice. You got to compete. You got to learn how to grow up with them. All of that stuff, friends, enemies, frenemies, all that. And so we're seeing all that vividly with all these companies. Where I mean, Microsoft, which basically gave OpenAI its boost, its rocket ship launch off the aircraft carrier 3 years ago with its multi-billion-dollar investment, in the last couple of weeks, invested with Nvidia into Anthropic, which is the number two competing company that was co-founded by founders of Anthropic, and so it's very kindergarten phase right now for AI in that way. I think
Yes,
I like that analogy
it is, yeah.
because one of my favorite books. Now I'm jumping ahead. I'm not going to do it as my read of the week, but one of my all-time favorite books. You can look it up. Is everything you want to know in life you learned in kindergarten, and that applies, I think, to humans. I think it applies to companies. And so, these kind of moments are important to kind of think about these things. The other thing, don't forget, is as much as this is a 3 year anniversary for OpenAI, it's also a 3 year anniversary for Nvidia, which has been around for over 31 years. Jensen Huang founded this company at a Denny's over 3 decades ago with, doing prosaic gaming cards, and that turned into this AI behemoth. They're on their way to make hundreds of billions in revenues in a $5 trillion company. Overnight success also because of ChatGPT's success, obviously, and got Nvidia to be a $5 trillion company. So those two are the bookends of this 3 year anniversary that we need to kind of just keep in mind, take a deep breath. As Google now says, hey, our TPUs are going to be awesome for all these tasks as well. And there's a whole host of chips coming from AMD and a whole bunch of other people for all kinds of things, and it's going to be a big market. Kindergarten. We then it's high school and college, and you know about all that, and now you're out of
Yeah.
college, and so it makes me think about how you were when you were 3 year old. Sorry. So that is those are, I think, are the key points that we wanted to touch on. There's a little bit, again, as usual, a lot of detail write ups on this and articles, just not just by us here at RTZ, but also other things that we thought were interesting. They'll be in the show notes, so please take a look at them. There's a lot more charts, graphs, all that stuff to look at. So that takes us to our main topic, which I thought would be interesting to talk about. The Economist had a great discussion on, hey, the supply side of AI infrastructure is coming along with hundreds of billions of dollars of investment, and everyone's all in. Companies are investing by the kid and caboodle in terms of building AI infrastructure. Do we have enough AI things to do for all of this? Or where are the AI applications, beyond ChatGPT, to your point earlier? And so it was a pretty interesting article. We'll put it up again and in the show notes. And I had a post in response in the, thinking about this as well in terms of AI usage and uses, demand versus the supply. And again, we've talked about this. We talked about AI browsers for months on this show. All of these things are the new types of usage applications that are going to be possible. Again, beginning of the beginning, and it's useful to kind of think about this on these kinds of moments because it doesn't all happen in a snapshot. It's a movie, and it's just kind of evolving. And there, you had some interesting thoughts on the kinds of things you've been looking at on the application side. Interesting
Yeah,
too.
the application side is in an interesting space. I think we have reached past the point. I think earlier on this year, it was very much throw AI at everything and see what sticks. And I think now maybe it's settled in a bit more. Obviously, it still has a ways to go. But a lot of the use cases that I'm seeing now, I'm more around the use cases that have to do with design and more on the product side of things. There's a lot of software that's being put out, especially through companies like Figma and whatnot. Of course, Figma has been down stock wise, but innovation wise, going head to head essentially with Adobe, they've been putting out a lot of interesting features regarding, what does it mean to create with AI. And I know that you have, spoiler alert, but later on in the show, we're going to talk a bit about AI music and what that means. But I think from the apps point of view, I think Google is doing a lot of really cool stuff, especially with Gemini 3. They've been teasing a lot of built with Google applications that are, starting from the ground up. And I think we're going to reach this like marketplace era soon, I guess, similar to how on the second iPhone they had the App Store. It's probably it'll be a matter of time before there's maybe even an app store within a lot of these models for these AI applications that are made bottom up using these services. So I think I'm more interested also in how it gets distributed and differentiated from regular, apps as it may be. I think that'd be a fun piece to track as well.
No, I think this question of AI applications is one that we should always be asking ourselves. And as an analyst, I do that regularly. That's what I've been doing for 30 years on every tech wave. But here, also very important to remember, especially in the hype phase and the excitement early 2, 3 year phase, when the newspapers, the magazines, the blogs, and the podcasts are just about what's the next thing. So this year's been robotics and self-driving cars and all these wonderful things that are going to change our world in the next 2 or 3 years. It's going to take years longer. But in the meantime, what's going to surprise us are the silly, prosaic things that are going to be much bigger than we think, application wise, in terms of kinds of things we're going to do with these things. And it's, when we look at this a year from now or 2 years from now, and then look at the kind of applications that came up, what I think will surprise us were the new things that happened, blew up, hundreds of millions of people used it. No one saw it coming. As an example of that, again, spoiler alert, I'm going to defer till we come to your read of the week because I had an important role to play in that little event, and it's getting redone in terms of. So we'll stay tuned. But what I'm trying to just emphasize under this AI application layer is just be open-minded, excited, have glass half full. Be careful, of course, about not doing some of the things that we've urged everyone, mainstream folks, not to do with AI. Do not think of it as a human thing. It's not sentient. It's not companion. It can pretend to be those things. It's a mirror. It's a mirror to our lives, us individually, as a society, etc. And use it as that kind of a tool and be open-minded and curious about it with obviously good balance between your emotions and your rational thinking. So very excited for where we're going on this AI application journey. And it's a good main topic to keep talking about, which I think takes us to our read of the week, which kind of gets us to that spoiler
Yeah.
alert that you talked about.
Yeah. So
So you have a good one.
I can talk about it a bit. And honestly, it's an area where I feel like I'll maybe serve up the ball and you'll have to hit it out of the park because it's an area that was new to me. It's an article from The Verge that is titled The Indie Web is Here to Make the Internet Weird Again. It speaks about a time of the internet that I obviously was around for but wasn't aware of just because of, me being young growing up in this time and whatnot. But it's an article that explains the maybe revolutionary or like pushback that's happening to a topic we discussed, I believe, in our last episode, this whole idea of the dead internet theory and how, there's this portion of people who think that maybe we're reaching a threshold in which a lot of the content created on the internet might not be made by people, but made by machines with, emergences of AI and whatnot. And it speaks about a time in the early 90s and then, pushing into the 2000s about these essentially like social media platforms that were called GeoCities, where it was essentially a web hosting service that let like millions of people publish handmade HTML pages or websites essentially that were organized into neighborhoods, hence the city's name. And it goes through the history of how Yahoo shut it down in 2009 and a lot of these sites going away and only surviving in, small archival areas with, functioning more as like a museum rather than, a functioning ecosystem of web pages. And then it speaks about how there was a reemergence of this called, of course, NeoCities in 2013 as a spiritual successor almost to GeoCities. And then this lasted for a bit and went away and other adjacent things have come up. But it speaks about this reemergence. In 2024, another platform called NecoWeb popped up, and it's forming this infrastructure almost of this movement against about like human made content versus machine made content. You know, the main purpose of the internet being to serve as a community for people to meet and interact. And as you can tell, it was all new to me. So I might not be the best to explain it, but I'd love to hear you being around at that time.
Thank you for setting it up. I love this piece. And for those of you watching AI Ramblings, Neil and I, we sometimes coordinate around certain topics, but most of the time, this is very organic, is what you're seeing. We put up our things that we want to talk about and don't really talk about them before the show. And when I saw this, it's like, oh my God, it makes me feel old because, especially the way you just described it all, GeoCities, you weren't sure. Being the head of internet research at Goldman starting in 93, I took Yahoo public in 95 at Goldman Sachs. And, it was the company that was the ChatGPT of its time. It basically defined what you saw, all the websites. And it was like one of the hottest companies in 95. A year or two later, big new application of the internet, as it were, was a company called GeoCities, which I took public as well. You've forgotten. Everyone's forgotten.
Yeah.
It's like, what is GeoCities? And now they know it's gotten renamed as NeoCities, not as a company, but as a portfolio of independent websites that are your generation is basically rediscovering the notion that with all these tools and capabilities that are now 20 years older, more capable, you can create in extraordinary amounts of creative websites, and not for business necessarily, but just to express yourself. That's what GeoCities was. It was a central place where people could just creatively express, creating all kinds of websites. And Yahoo, when it started, was basically a directory of a few hundred, going to a few thousand websites. In the next 2 or 3, 4 years, it went to millions of websites. And most of those millions came from regular people that were just mucking around with HTML editors and creating websites on buying domain names and so on. And that became kind of the genesis of what you're talking about, this movement that GeoCities was one of the companies to take advantage of that and centralize that capability to create these hosted places for people to show their creativity. And there were lots of other companies along those lines as well. GeoCities was one. It was bought by Yahoo and then shut down and so on. Just a little chapter. And again, when you celebrate 3 years of ChatGPT, in a long journey, a lot of these things become footnotes, and that's where we are. But also, there's another aphorism on technology. In technology, there's almost nothing new. It's everything just getting reinvented, and that's why I love this article. I would encourage everyone to read this whole thing. It's really well done because it shows how organically the world's just taken the GeoCities and created this thing. It's not a central company this time. It's this movement called NeoCities, where they're using these much more advanced tools to create these places, independent places of creativity where you can find good, bad, ugly kind of stuff on the web, and you're off the beaten path. It's like you're in a big city of New York or a big city. You name your favorite city, and you go to the outer edges of that city, and all of a sudden you see everything's kind of spacing out a little bit, and you're seeing odd little houses and buildings, and you're like, "What's this? What's that?" That's what this stuff is. And in a world of centralized internet, people sometimes find the joy of rediscovering just smaller things when they kind of get out from downtown. But all of this over the last 25, 30 years is human created. And where AI comes in, which is what the article talks about at the end, is AI is going to help create a lot more of these, with vibe coding and so on. We can create apps, we can create websites much easier. So the proportionality, we're going to go from millions to billions of these things. It'll have to be found. It'll be messy. It'll be neo AI cities, whatever you want to call it. And that's the journey, and that's why it's so fun. So to see one generation like me that was involved in some of this, it was so important. It was so investors would just go so frothing over all this, and to see another generation come not too long and say, "Hey, this was kind of cool, so retro. Let's kind of try to figure it out and tinker with it and call it this and that." That's life. I love it, and thank you for bringing up that as a read of the week. My read of the week this week is actually I had to put up 3, not 1, but 3, on the broader topic of just the US versus China in the context of AI. And, the last 2 or 3 years, it's been the US has basically made it a geopolitical issue in the context of AI, space race with China. Nvidia has been a poster boy in this thing in terms of should we sell Nvidia chips into China or not? There are pros and cons to that. I'm in the pro side that I think US companies should have the flexibility to sell into China and everywhere else. The geopolitical risks, I think, are overstated, overdone. And NVIDIA, if we don't do it, we potentially lose the the ecosystems that build up on NVIDIA's technology, not just the hardware, but the open source CUDA software, that China will build alternatives. And that's where my three reads are. My first article is about how NVIDIA has fought in Washington to get some leverage in terms of their sales into China. Right now, they're not allowed, but that may change in the current Trump versus Xi negotiations that are going on. The second of the number two and number three articles are from the Chinese perspective. What the Chinese government is doing to discourage its AI ecosystem, the large companies, medium, small companies, from using less of NVIDIA's technologies, which is a bad thing, I think, for the US. And there's a lot of detail in both those articles worth reading if you're interested in this topic. And it comes at it from the hardware and the software point of view. So with these three reads, you kind of get a good sense of the lay of the land on the both ends of this divide, and NVIDIA being in the middle, particularly apropos because we're talking about 3-year anniversaries of 20, 30-year-old companies and changes and so on. So that's my reads of the week on this side of the equation, which takes us to our obsession of the week. And you have a
Yeah.
couple of doozies here. Go ahead.
Yeah, this was something I think that came out a couple like maybe like two weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. But we didn't get a chance to cover it, and there was this article that reminded me of it, and we hadn't discussed it on the New York Times. It's about the iPhone Pocket, which is Apple's new accessory. Apple's been doing this interesting
It's
thing
a
where they've
sock.
partnered up. It's a
It's a
sock. Yeah,
sock for your phone.
yeah,
$230. But it's
yeah,
very,
so
very nice.
that's most
Sorry.
people's reaction to it, but the article breaks down why that's maybe not the best way to look at it because well, first I think it's important to talk about how it's maybe uncharacteristic of Apple to do this because Apple infamously likes control of everything and likes to do everything. And the fact that they're letting Miyake, which is, for those who may not know, the designer that made Steve Jobs' iconic black turtlenecks custom made for him. They partnered up with Miyake, and they've recently actually partnered up with another design studio to make an iPhone stand. It's just first to talk about the trend of Apple actually collaborating with external design teams to make accessories for their devices. The first thing. Second thing is the article discusses a bit of the response to the reaction that you just saw here is that it's just $200-$300 sock for your iPhone, which essentially it is, but it speaks more about the concept of design and what does design mean. And there's this interesting quote by one of the head designers behind this thing where he says that design should be leaving things a bit less defined to allow more creativity from the user side. Maybe if you're given an Miyake garment, at first you have no idea how to wear it, but as soon as you know how to wear it, you wear it in your own way. And it kind of has to do with this whole individual creativity and this age of AI where people are maybe a bit scared of the creative side of things going away and this big monolithic structure. Today, it is, yeah, it's essentially a sock for your phone, but it speaks more about how a lot of these things that are put out, maybe people find use cases for them that weren't intended originally, and it has to just do with creativity and how design kind of helps facilitate that. But yes, it is. It is a sock for your iPhone.
I was doing it in jest. You know, I'm a sucker for anything like this. I
Yeah,
actually own the original Apple sock for the iPod that Steve Jobs is
yeah,
very famous. You can look up the YouTube video. It's hilarious. He's actually doing it tongue in cheek, but not so. There's literally a 3-pack of socks where you can get your
uh-huh.
tripod. I own that. I also own the Apple cloth, the $30 Apple cloth. I'm a sucker for this stuff. And by the way, I haven't told you, my wife and your mom, I'll probably end up getting both of these sock things, which, it's an indulgence because they're designed. The one thing I'll say is this kind of observation from my co-host, Neil McQuana. For those of you who don't know, Neil, by the way, happy birthday to you too, with belated 2 weeks. Neil turned 24, not 3, a few days ago. And in our household, he is known as, for those of you who speak Indian languages, he's known as style by, meaning the dude with style is what it means by his brother. And he is Mr. Product. He's Mr. Design. This is his passion. He's been very focused on it since he was a wee tall. He knew colors. He knew shapes, sizes. He was very opinionated, still is, and building his design language on all of this. So it's wonderful to hear him talk about these things in this context, whether it's from a company like Apple or designers on the clothing side. Whenever Neil McQuana, the style by in my eyes, says something about something from a design point of view, product point of view, I perk up. And this one is worth obsessing over. So I like your
Yeah, for
obsession of
sure.
the week,
Thank you for that.
and which gets me to my obsession of the week for the duration, which is I've been on this travel trip. I was listening to music on these long plane flights, etc. And I got a little tired of my Spotify playlists and so on, so I did kind of go into some of these AI music sites like Suno and so on, and listen to all these great AI. There were wonderful TikToks. So there's this huge trend going on, talking about independent websites where amazing creativity is going on. Obviously, some on this side of the copyright laws, some on the other side, where people are just using AI tools to create extraordinary covers of songs in different styles, imagining in it different ways. It's nothing different than what human musicians haven't done for centuries, which is remix and retake, and what hip hop and rap and all these things kind of evolve. Mixing and borrowing from here and putting it there. Obviously, with deference to copyright and money issues or all of this. But AI music, in my mind, there's an article which I'll put up, which is again debating the question: is AI music bad or good? And in my eyes, it could be wonderful. It's just beginning, and then we're going to see some amazing incarnations of this. And more often than not, it'll be a tool for people to create new things. And yes, the machines will create amazing things as well. So it's an interesting article. I love some of the things that I listen to on these AI generated playlists. They were AI generated both in terms of the AI creating the tracks, and then AI generated in terms of people creating extraordinary tracks with some guidance, mixing genres and covers and titles and emotions and so on. And it took me to places that I didn't know I could go to in these new forms. And that was what was exciting about it. So I did get obsessed with it on this flight a little bit. And so that I wanted to highlight as my obsession topic of the week. And so that brings us to our burning questions. And speaking of music, and I know you are, again, as along with being a style buy and a very aficionado on product and style, you have some distinct tastes in music. And I just wanted curious update us on how do you discover and keep up with your favorite music? What are your
Yeah,
apps?
I'm still we obviously maybe we don't need it, but we have I feel like subscriptions to everything. We have Apple Music and Spotify, which are the two main ones. I use Spotify mostly due to the social aspect of it too. I think a lot of my friends are on it, and when you send links, it's easier to send Spotify links when you're sharing music with people. If you send an Apple Music link, there's maybe less of a chance they'll actually listen to it. So that goes into the whole social engineering side of things, like habitual stuff that maybe you don't think about why you use something, but that is why you use it. But in terms of the listening experience itself, I don't know. I've always been more of an album person. Like I'll find an album I like
Mm.
and I'll just listen to the album. I don't really like playlist music. That's just the way I am. A lot of times I will just I'll click a song and I'll just see where the autoplay takes me. And it's pretty good. It's tuned pretty well, and obviously that's the algorithms and the AI behind it all. But in terms of AI generated music, I don't really think that's an area that I've touched much. Also, just because of the fact that I don't know, there is some part of me, whatever this creative side or whatever it is, I don't feel fully right doing that. I feel like listening to music that's made, recorded by people, but then there's this whole inner argument of like, how different is this from like auto tune, and auto tune starting in the early 2000s. There's a lot of backlash to that, being like, this isn't real singing. You're not this good of a singer. It's just the technology is helping you sound better. How different is AI generated music from that? Because in the end of the day, a lot of these tools are made by humans for humans. So it's like, how is AI? Some could argue, how is AI different than a piano or a guitar? It's just an instrument that's being played by humans. So
I'll just say, since you brought up the piano, one of my favorite songs, The Piano Man, if it was playing in a forest with no humans, nobody's going to appreciate it. All music is for us humans. The computers don't understand the music. They're just massive database remixers and creators with that stuff. There is no appreciation of that. It converts it into algorithms, puts it stochastically in terms of statistical tables, matches things, and figures out this was kind of appreciated over there. It's all a reflection, a mirror back of our tastes on a global basis. 8 billion people getting up every morning, making all kinds of sounds, dancing to all kinds of sounds, thinking about all kinds of sounds, humming all kinds of sounds. And music, if it comes from a human, or a human augmented by extraordinary amount of tools that are AI, bring it on. I love it. I love it. Do not be binary about this. Is my other gospel about this. We're not created music the first time humans were like, oh, there's a rock and another rock. Let me just clash them, and that's kind of a beat. Yay! That's how it all started. Keep it on. Third year of ChatGPT. It's just getting started. So I love it. And so I love your choice of your burning question. Thank you.
Yeah. So for mine, for you, it would be, I guess to preface it, I can talk about how I came up with this question. It has to do with this whole idea of AI generated stuff and content, which we've
Uh,
talked about forever. But the reason the question came up is because we recently, my parents and I went to watch the movie in theaters. We watched the new Knives Out movie, which is great, by the way. But while we were sitting in the theater, you have the ads that play for like half an hour before the movie starts, and the movie starts later than they tell you it's going to start, and it kind of sucks.
always.
But usually it's just like one of these services, like movie or whatever, and there'll be this host and they'll walk you through like trivia and all that. But this time there was a lot of like local ads for like plumbers and electricians and stuff. But one of the ads was fully AI, like it wasn't made by a person. It was fully AI generated. And like the tagline was like, this ad may not be real, but our discounts are. Like that was the way they were selling it. And you could audibly hear the entire theater groan when the ad came up. Like when they said the tagline and it registered to everyone who was paying attention, this was AI, like everyone hated it, which I honestly wasn't the biggest fan of either because it's like, I don't know, it comes across as like a bit low effort to do a full AI ad. And it's obviously very AI. Like you can tell it's an AI generated ad, and it got this like audible response from everyone in the theater. But that made me think that we do this podcasting thing every week, and I would wonder if you given your views on all this, would you watch like a fully AI generated podcast? Is that something that you feel like you'd actually sit down, turn on, and watch all the way through?
So frigging lutely. Absolutely. Again, anyone who understands me as someone who loves technology and so on, again, these are just tools. They're just remixing the image of the world that we already have. We have now millions of podcasts. It's extraordinary amount of creativity that's happened in the world of podcasts just in the last 4 to 5 years, from whoever you want to point at the top to the bottom, right? And there's creativity, just like the internet that we've been talking about with the GeoCities and the NeoCities and the new websites. And so, yeah, there's no reason to me. I mean, and today's efforts at podcast creation and AI ad creation is going to be sophomoric. It will be kind of humorous. It will be groan inducing. Why? Because these technologies are so young. It's no less groan inducing than the first websites that were put up on GeoCities, 96. You
Yeah.
can look them up and they look, oh my God, I can't believe you. Same thing with MySpace. Speaking of old services, where people created their personal spaces. So yeah, and that podcast, once they get more sophisticated, I love Notebook LLM, which is Google's product that's creates essentially podcasts out of written content. So that's the first. I have listened to a few of them. I think there's a lot more to be done with productization. There's no discovery mechanism for
Yes.
that. It's a lot more friction than there should be in terms of if Google were to do with Notebook LLM what they did with YouTube, which is a single link, universally accessible everywhere, and can be without any friction. When you listen to any key piece of any written product narrated by people of your choice or pretend people of your choice. Yes, these are extraordinary tools, and I would absolutely listen to them. There's no different than that conversation on AI music. If it's AI fully 100% AI generated versus humans augmented by AI. To me, it's just one part of the continuum, and I think there's magic in across that spectrum because it's ultimately us humans that are recognizing Piano Man in the Wilderness or any song that you want to say, or Beethoven or Mozart. We're the ones, we're the arbiters. And so I'm not going to preclude that. I'm not going to see hear an amazing podcast created in this form or that form because ChatGPT 8.0 has now finally cracked some of the code on that. I think it's terrific. Be open minded. Classes half full, and I thank you for a very it's a very good and deep question, and everyone has their points on that spectrum for various reasons, and I'm kind of like urge people to kind of look toward the horizon and be excited with open eyes. And with that, I want to thank you all for joining us for yet another 31st episode on the third birthday of OpenAI's ChatGPT. As usual, if any comments, feedback, suggestions, please keep them coming. As usual, request for like and subscribe always helps the algorithm figure out how to tell other people about us. And as usual, please stay tuned.
Yeah. See you next time. Thanks.